Today's heavy metal music is categorically different from previous forms of popular music. It contains the element of hatred and meanness of spirit. Its principal themes are extreme violence, extreme rebellion, substance abuse, sexual promiscuity, perversion, and Satanism. I know personally of no form of popular music before which has had as one of its central elements the element of hatred. This was part of a statement that Dr. Joe Stussy gave before the US Senate in 1985, testifying about the threat of heavy metal music. And even though he clearly exaggerated and lied about what heavy metal lyrics were actually about, his words betrayed one kernel of truth. The establishment opposed the heavy metal counterculture. So how did heavy metal go from being something that went against mainstream conformity and turn into cosplaying? First of all, this isn't a gatekeeping video. If you like heavy metal music, regardless of what attracted you to it, you don't need anybody's approval or permission to enjoy it or to go to shows, and nobody should feel allowed or encouraged to attack you for it. This is not about who is or isn't a poser. Instead, what I want to do is to talk to you about a different way of looking at metal and its origin, and maybe that will make you enjoy it more and in a whole different way. Also, this isn't about how old bands were better and new bands are bad. It's undeniable that many modern bands are not only good, but better than many old bands. And so I don't want this to come off as merely a generational thing. Finally, and this is very important, my words should be understood as applying only to the Western world. Heavy metal as a social phenomenon is very different in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and in general in Asia and Africa. So please keep that in mind when you watch it. What I want to talk about is what I perceive as a certain simplification of heavy metal and the culture that surrounds it, and which, in my view, has largely reduced it to a costume party. It went from being a musical and philosophical rejection of the mainstream, a rebellion against what sociologist Dina Weinstein once called the pieties and platitudes of normal society, and became a part of it. Since heavy metal is the genre that I've listened to my entire life and I've studied its history, I think I'm in a better position to speak about it than about any other musical genre or subculture. However, I do think it's important to point out that while this video is about heavy metal, this phenomenon has also happened in other musical genres. Hip-hop, for example, has gone through a very similar transformation. In the beginning, the genre was shaped by artists like Public Enemy, who spoke against the injustices affecting Black communities in the United States. And although some of that still exists, a big part of hip-hop has instead become what some African-American artists and scholars have called a minstrel show that has created a caricature of what Black communities are actually like.
One of the disappointing things about tip drill and that whole genre of music videos is that they have taken a view of women of color that's not radically different from the views of 19th century white slaveholders.
All of this, of course, while becoming the most popular and profitable genre of music. And it's easy to understand why this change happened. The music industry prefers artists that are devoted entirely to dumb things because that's much easier to sell.
I could walk up to you right now and say, yo, could have been a doctor, or I could have been a pops. Wonder what would have happened had I would have been a cop. Would I help the block, protect the good from the bad, or just be killing niggas because the power on my badge? You know what I mean? That's nice, but nobody want to hear that right now. They don't accept that shit. They don't give us deals. Who's the industry usually don't give us deals when we speak righteously and things of that nature. You know, they think we don't want to hear that.
Keep that idea in mind because it's gonna come up again, but for now, let's get back to metal. Now, obviously, part of the reason why heavy metal is less shocking than it was before is simply because people got used to it. And this isn't surprising. Everything that was once shocking eventually becomes normal. Think of horror films. When The Phantom of the Opera was first released back in 1925, it was reported that people fainted and screamed when they finally saw the Phantom's face. Nowadays, you wouldn't even scare a child with that scene. After all, it's really nothing if we compare it with things like The Walking Dead, a show that, even though it's full of gore, has merchandising for small children. We've really gotten used to that kind of violent or revolting imagery, and so artists who want to scare the audience have to continuously change their approach and try new things. Similarly, as people got used to them, metal artists who wanted to be controversial or who wanted to be shocking also had to grow, evolve, and try new things. And that's where I think problems began. Not because there's anything wrong with musicians and the genre in general changing and evolving, but rather because these changes were mostly cosmetic. The imagery became more explicit, the concerts became more theatrical, but the importance of being a real counterculture went down. Now, this isn't something new. In fact, people like Ronnie James Dio argued that this trend started already decades ago with the proliferation of more MTV-friendly bands.
MTV killed heavy metal music.
Holy diver, you've been down too long in the midnight sea. Oh, what's becoming of me?
You had to have a video, which is very true. If you didn't have a video, you were doomed. And I think all of us hated that. I think the ones who didn't grow up in the video era hated that, because then we had to become something that was competing with something we didn't like. And you suddenly had the hair bands coming out. It was only about what they looked like and how many parties they could have and how many 14-year-old girls they could pull after the show. That should be an emblem somewhere, Poison killed everything. Honestly, those kind of bands did do that, I think. I found the songs nonsensical, had no musical gist to them whatsoever. The subject matter was all about partying and, as Motley Crue said, girls, girls. I mean, I didn't grow up with music that way. I'm proud of music. I love music, and I worked hard at being a good musician. And those people worked hard at making an awful lot of money on the coattails of other people.
And just like that, despite having started as a complete rejection of the vacuous nature of mainstream society, heavy metal started to become a part of it. And I think that it has gotten worse. After all, if metal fans are so proud of being against the mainstream, then we really need to ask ourselves, how come such a big part of this subculture looks exactly the same as mainstream culture? From stupid red carpet events that look like something out of TMZ, to news sites that traffic in gossip and nonsense, and in general, the emphasis being placed on exclusively the superficial, sometimes it really feels like there are more similarities between mainstream culture and metal culture than there are differences. It's no longer a rejection of what we see in mainstream society, but instead just a costume party in which the same behaviors, the same stupidity, the same conformity is celebrated, at least as long as you're wearing a band shirt. It is at best a disguised version of conformity, mainstream culture with some cosmetic differences. Conformity cosplaying as rebellion. Of course, cosmetic things can also be rebellious statements in and of themselves. Twisted Sister cross-dressing, Mayhem and Burzum using corpse paint, Rage Against the Machine protesting naked against the PMRC, or Gigi Allen being Gigi Allen, can all be seen at the time as having had a deeper meaning, even if you disagree with the point that they were trying to make. The problem is that many of these cosmetic expressions are no longer controversial, but we pretend that they are, and that emulating them is all that it takes to be a rebel. Even an underground genre like black metal became a bit of a punchline as corpse paint stopped being shocking and became just a staple of YouTube makeup tutorials, or satanic symbols started showing up on Hot Topic and in advertisements. The 90s were probably the last time that heavy metal created flashes of controversy. Bands like Iron Maiden, Megadeth, Slayer, King Diamond were all routinely scapegoated as responsible for all kinds of tragedies. I mean, hell, as late as 1997, Marilyn Manson was getting bomb threats and boycotts during his Death to the World tour, and the following year he was even blamed for things like the Columbine High School massacre, as politicians, as usual, used heavy metal and video games as an easy scapegoat.
Manson has canceled the last 5 dates of his U.S. tour out of respect for those lost in Littleton. But the singer says artists like himself are not the ones to blame.
This is perhaps the sickest group ever promoted by a mainstream record company.
But then 9/11 happened. And with the focus now being placed on radical Islam and terrorism, heavy metal and trench coat wearing nerds weren't such an easy scapegoat anymore. And then the massification of the internet and social media all created moral panics where heavy metal culture was no longer a suspect. And yes, from time to time we do read about some fundamentalist opposing a metal show or some grifter politician blaming heavy metal bands for something, but most of the time, heavy metal or being a metal fan is no longer a controversial subject. Now obviously there are many good things about this. For starters, it shows that secularism has become much stronger in the West and that less people are succumbing to Christian fundamentalism. Also, it has allowed many more people to discover the genre, to go to concerts, to go to shows, to meet other fans, and to play this music. And that's an objectively good thing. There's nothing inherently positive about being in the underground with less people listening to this music that I love, and it's great that more people get to enjoy it. But that increasing popularity has come at a price, and that price is that the idea of rebellion, at least the rebellion and defiance that was inherent to heavy metal, has been commodified. It was transformed into a look or a sound and sold as if it was something meaningful. People have been duped into thinking that to be a rebel is to consume, to wear certain clothes, to buy certain drinks, to get tattoos, to get piercings, but not to go any deeper. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with tattoos or piercings or band t-shirts or anything like that. The problem comes in seeing those actions as grand rebellious gestures, even though in and of themselves, they're just things you paid for. And once it became clear that this toothless version of rebellion was marketable, the industry amplified it.
Record companies, they do that all the time. You know, if one's good, 100's better. And you went ka-ching, ka-ching, ka-ching. And you had the W bands, you know, the White Lions, the White Snakes, the Wingers, the Warrants. And it got so processed and so refined that it became pablum.
And once again, this isn't exclusive to heavy metal. Hip-hop underwent a very similar transformation.
By the structures and the powers that be, the corporations, they found a way that they think they could put soul in the bottle. If they could put soul in the bottle, you know, then they could put manhood in the bottle and then show the bottle and advertise it, because they've one-dimensionalized us and commodified us into being a one-trick image. We throwing money at the camera. We flashing, you know, jewelry that can actually give a town in Africa water. We got $160 million contracts. Because we got happy niggas.
Major labels, advertisers, and sponsors all love uncontroversial, lowest common denominator stuff because it's easy to sell, and so there are big incentives for bands, for websites to go in that direction. That's why a big part of the metal press is now devoted to reaction videos and clickbait, because that's much more advertiser friendly. And it's also why so many artists prefer to keep fighting the same defeated enemies instead of actually running the risk of offending people. Have you noticed how even though Christianity isn't so powerful anymore, most hardcore satanic bands only bitch and moan about Christianity? Or how many anti-authoritarian bands don't seem to have an opinion about any of the massive protests that are happening right now? And I don't mean that they don't have the same opinions as me. I mean that they don't have any opinion. Now, don't get me wrong. All of us, people in general, artists included, should not feel forced to speak about things that we are not knowledgeable enough to talk about. Silence is often the right approach when you are ignorant. But isn't it weird that those artists that have built their careers on parroting Antifa and anarchist slogans aren't saying anything? Now, I single out Arch Enemy because it's funny and I enjoy it, but they're just a small sample of the problem. They're a symptom of a system that has found a way to package and sell a feeling of rebellion to people. Just get the right clothes, listen to the right music, and you too can feel like you're standing up for something and against someone. It provides a costume of meaningfulness while being completely empty. And the result is that we forget the real meaning of rebellion. That it's not about scandalizing parents or clergymen, although that's a fun byproduct of it. Instead, it's about opposing illegitimate authority. It's about refusing to follow the herd and instead being able to find your own path. It's the idea of non serviam, I will not serve, the Latin phrase that in Christian mythology represents Lucifer's attitude towards the Judeo-Christian God. I will not bow down. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, as John Milton put it in Paradise Lost. That's the kind of rebellion that we should seek to emulate, an intellectual rebellion, and not just an opportunity for companies to sell us stuff to look like the very narrow definition of rebel that they've created. And while there's nothing wrong with doing simple things like partying, dressing up for concerts, and just having fun, we should also demand more if we actually want this to be a real counterculture. Conformity is the enemy of rebellion, and a big part of heavy metal culture is now conformist. So thank you very much for watching this. I touched upon some of these topics already in an interview that I did with Mauricio Iacono, the singer of Cataclysm, and you can check it in the link below. And that's all I have for you today. Like and subscribe this video, and now I have to go because I bought the new Tony Hawk game and I really want to go play it. See you. Stay metal.
time.